Hi there, this is a bonus segment on the meeting between Putin and Xi Jinping that I wanted to, well, it was part of my daily update, but I thought I'd cut it off and turn it into a completely separate video because otherwise that daily update would have been too long. So this is just a bit of a discussion of me about the implications of that meeting between Putin and Xi of China as they met in Uzbekistan, and a bit of the talk about the organization and a little bit of talk of the economics and whatnot. Anyway, there you go. Enjoy. Or not. What else I wanted to talk about was what's going on geopolitically elsewhere. So you have the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So what is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? This is basically the answer to kind of NATO, kind of economic, geopolitical answer to, I guess, NATO, UN, Western trading blocs, right? And it is basically Russia and China, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, and Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan, China, Uzbekistan, these sorts of countries, as well as Turkey is a dialogue partner, Belarus, Afghanistan, and Mongolia. Although Turkey is a pretty big player, it's only a dialogue partner there. India and Pakistan were granted full membership in 2017 as well. So this is an interesting group of countries, but I don't think it presents as big a threat possibly as we might think, given some of those countries are not big global players. So this is really to make these guys feel a bit better about themselves. But they are meeting at the moment in Uzbekistan. And what people have been watching is what is the reaction of Xi Jinping? Because people have long been worried as to whether this is going to the whole Ukraine conflict and the fact that the West has come to the help of Ukraine, has that pushed Russia and China ever closer? But China, although they're ideologically aligned with Russia in terms of kind of communism, really the Chinese communism and the Russian communism really isn't proper sort of communism. It's an economically driven model. Where in Russia you've got oligarchs and Putin himself taking a big cut personally in a lot of the money that is made out of the natural resources. In China, it is economically driven, their communism, and they understand that Russia represents, I don't know, something like 2% of the trade that China do. So really, if they annoy the West, they're going to be screwed. And Russia on the brink of possibly a bit of an economic meltdown in terms of property and stuff going on over there. I won't bore you with it, but they're on a precipice themselves. And if the West start putting sanctions on China or get into a trade war with China, then that causes them way more headaches than Russia losing a war to Ukraine. And in fact, Russia losing a war to Ukraine means that the West has sanctioned Russian oil and gas, which means China can come along and go, oh yeah, we'll have it, but we'll have it for a lot cheaper. So they're really, really good for themselves, China, at getting driving prices down and getting deals that are really beneficial for themselves. So actually, Russia are being forced to sell their oil and an increasing amount of gas to China. And China can basically say to Russia, they're in a driving position, you can say, well, we'll have it for this much money. And actually, the rest of Asia are broadly supporting Russian oil, particularly oil. Gas is a lot more difficult to transport, so or less so. But where the West have put sanctions on Russia, the rest of the world, well, parts of Asia really haven't. And they don't see doing trade with Russia as having a moral dimension. They're not really bothered about that. So you got, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, or lots of countries doing, brisk, very good natural resource trade with Russia. But of course, this then brings into question, were our sanctions the right thing to do? And there are some people that say, particularly on oil, gas is slightly different because Russia struggled to transport gas other than through pipelines that are already built. Then gas is a different thing to oil. But oil can be transported far more easily. So if we put sanctions on Russia for oil, what that ends up meaning is that we then have to spend more money. The West spends more money in Europe, particularly getting screwed over, because they end up having to spend more money getting oil from elsewhere. And this then drives up the prices for oil if we can't get the Russian oil. And in fact, what Russia's been able to do is continue to sell that oil. And although they sell it at a lower price, they're still getting shed loads of profit, right? And therefore, the sanctions on Russia have hit the West more than they've hit Russia. So there are a good many people saying that the sanctions on oil was a wrong thing to do. I don't know. I think these things are complicated. I won't give you my opinion. But we've then had to go to Saudi Arabia and places with, just as problematic human rights violations and take oil from them at a higher price. Now, the people that are saying that we shouldn't have put sanctions on oil say that the alternative would have been actually to continue buying Russian oil, but flooding the market with extra supply, driving the price down, and therefore lowering Russian, profits to a greater extent than the sanctions have done. And that the argument is that would have been a better thing to do. It's almost the opposite, which is that, we'll keep buying your oil, but we're gonna make force OPEC or encourage OPEC to produce a greater supply of oil, and the supply and demand will stay the same. Supply goes up, so therefore the price comes down. But instead, we've cut off supply from Russia, so that means our demand has stayed the same, but the supply is less. So that because we're having to go elsewhere to get existing, oil reserves, and that drives the price up. And this then drives inflation up, and then people blame, in America, Biden's popularity rating has been correlated very strongly with basically the gas prices, as in petrol prices, which is dependent on the oil, and there isn't much a government can do about that. So it's kind of unfair on Biden. He gets stung for like a really high inflation, and actually that's not his fault. This is capitalism, okay? Now, humans aren't very good at blaming abstract concepts like capitalism for things. So if you're like, right, my life is worse because everything's more expensive, I'm going to blame the governments, or I can either blame myself, or if it's not my fault, if it's not our fault as a local community, then it's the government's fault, right? So therefore it's a government's fault. If I can't blame foreigners or young people or whatever, I can't blame immigrants. There are different sections of society people blame, right? But the easy go-to is government, right? It's not our fault, therefore it's a government's fault. The government's like, it's not our fault. It's the way that free market capitalism works. Like, we can't control. You can't, on the one hand, say we can't regulate, okay, which is what happens in America. It's about the free market. You can't regulate. So over successive decades, let's strip out regulation, and then as soon as prices for stuff go up, you blame the government. It's like, hang on, we can't regulate these things. This is a free market capitalistic system. That is what is driving up the prices, and it's as a result of geopolitical things that although America are trying to solve, they weren't the ones who invaded Ukraine. Okay, so just a real snapshot of how difficult it is for rulers for governments, I suppose, to solve these economic issues quickly, but they still get the blame. Anyway, let's rewind back to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Right, so they've met. Now, the interesting thing is that, and Phillips O'Brien is a great, you should follow him on Twitter, he's brilliant. China has lost almost as much strategically as Russia in this war. NATO enlarged and more united. Russia shown to be a paper tiger, so the US can send more to the Pacific. More concern about defending democracy in general. Darn right they have concerns. Okay, what this says is that, and it's the same with Russia. Russia's intentions in invading Ukraine were to, because NATO was encroaching, they saw, and the power of NATO and the EU were getting too much, and they wanted Ukraine not to be a part of that. Well, the problem is, in invading Ukraine, NATO have now got a couple more members. Everyone's now giving NATO more money and resources, and they've become far more prominent, and the EU has become far more united than Putin would have liked. In other words, the exact opposite has happened to what his intentions would have been. And this has knock-on effects with Russia, as they think, well, Russia to China, Russia isn't the great army and the great nation we thought it was, because they're getting done over by Ukraine, although with the West's help. And that means the West are going to be slightly more, brave in making these stances, and issues over Taiwan could bubble up. And so therefore this has worked against against China. And, this is working in favor of democracy in general. But what has been said, so Xi Jinping has said that he understands your questions and concerns about Ukraine, but what the Chinese leader has done is not come out in absolute open support for Russia, and that says an awful lot. So the meeting has been interesting because it has showed, I think, what CNN says, what appears to be a veiled admission of their diverging views over the protracted military assault. And this is because really China didn't say very much about the war openly. And Putin's own statement was, "We highly appreciate the balanced position of our Chinese friends." So to call it a balanced position shows that China have actually said, "No, we're not too happy about this," and okay, that's good, but this is not so good. So the balanced position of our Chinese friends in connection with the Ukrainian crisis. We understand your questions and concerns in this regard. So they've obviously come to the table with questions and concerns about the war. During today's meeting, of course, we will explain in detail our position on this issue, although we have spoken about this before. So the meeting, although, these are aligned nations in certain regards, China is playing it very carefully here because they know what side their bread is buttered. And the Financial Times says, quoting Alexander Gabarev, who's a fellow of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, said that if Putin is that obsessed with Ukraine, what can Xi realistically do? Getting cheap Russian commodities and weapons designs is good for Beijing, and the departure of the Putin regime and the unlikely prospect of a pro-Western government in Russia is a terrible nightmare for China. So on the one hand, basically, they want the war to continue because they're getting good stuff out of it, but they don't want Putin to be deposed of, because actually that could cause problems going forward. So they're treading really carefully. Anyway, that's what's going on internationally. Russia are trying to offload a bunch of gas they've got a pipeline that is, I think, 32 billion cubic meter pipeline that's going to Russia at the moment, but that is actually not a great amount, and they're trying to build, or they've tabled a 50 billion cubic meter pipeline, a further one to China. And the problem is that would be a very long pipeline, very expensive, and it might not solve the issues that they have with regard to gas, which is that they are, at the moment, they have to burn off gas because no one's buying it enough. So that is a huge issue for Russia. Now, we can see Russia in a problem. Since the early 2000s, Russia have had every month they've made money. Okay, their budget is looking good. But at the moment, they've had 2 months of a deficit budget. Okay, and that is very worrying for the Russians. The sanctions are beginning to bite. The economic precarious economic position that they are in is beginning to bite, and the fact that their industries in Russia are utterly devastated by this war and by the sanctions. You know, the car industry, the aerospace industry, this is all biting. And their 2 months of a deficit budget is not good news. And so all of this coming together for Russia at the moment is, you know, the writing is on the wall unless something drastically changes. It's also worth noting that Xi Jinping has skipped the dinner with Putin, allies and the allies, so other members, other leaders in that organisation, supposedly as a COVID precaution. But it does make you wonder, you know, whether things aren't as rosy between those two, given what has been said, the very guarded things have been said. He was absent from group photographs, and you know, didn't go to that meal. So, you know, what does that tell you? Could say something. Could just be literally he was taking COVID precautions, but I don't know. The cynic in me thinks that there might be a little bit more to it than that. So thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, and you can also join or contribute your thanks, whatever's cool with you. I really appreciate this. It obviously takes me some time and effort to do this, so any help is gratefully received. Take care. Question all your sources, including me. Don't take anything I say as some kind of, you know, infallible truth. I could be wrong, but question all your sources. I'll have to say I am pro-Ukraine. So even what are my sources? Are they all pro-Ukraine sources? Hopefully, all of this comes out in a wash. So the things I say are things that are happening, and I will put my spin on things, my opinions, and that will be tainted by the fact that I'm pro-Ukraine and not pro-Russia. But hopefully this is as fair and balanced as well. Certainly I feel I'm being as fair and balanced as I can be. But let me know in the comments how you feel. Anyway, take care.